Double-Edged Destiny, a Fracture's Alternative Universe fanfiction by Doglover61402 / The Christian Ninja. Chapter 1, Anything for a Friend. Please be warned that this chapter has some gruesome descriptions of torture. It may be disturbing to some people. If this is a problem, please wait until Chapter 2 is finished, as this chapter will have a mild recap. The time is 4 days after Ender Wish and immediately before Cold as Ice the Remake. The setting is the End in Dragonspire. Smoke hung thick in the air, caused by the bonfires lit on top of each obsidian pillar. With the End crystals gone, the Nether Horde decided to replace them with a hellish sign of their victory. Much of the End capital city had been devastated in the battle, giving the whole city a charred appearance. Anything not made of obsidian was blackened and destroyed. Wither skeletons and pigmen, both alive and undead, roamed the city. Not a live Ender person was to be seen amongst the wreckage, with only a few dead Endermen lying on the ground. Most of the bodies had already been tossed into the void. The Nether had branded their victory into the destruction. The few surviving Ender citizens suffered a horrible fate, shoved into cages constructed by the Horde. The cages were simple, cube-shaped buildings constructed of nether brick without any windows. They were positioned on the east side of the island. Since so few Endermen remained, only 2 cages had been constructed. The victims had been poisoned with a powerful substance that inhibited their teleportation. Twice a day, the Horde would harvest their Ender pearls through a gruesome process. The victims' pained cries resonated through the brick walls, while the captors mocked their misery. No one had any hope of being rescued from this miserable state. Out of the 3 rulers of this world, the Underwatchers, only one remained in the city, but she too was a prisoner. Vortis the Dragon Seer had perished in battle, Zeganern the End Dancer had barely escaped, and Ceres the End Matriarch had been taken hostage. The other End cities were countless blocks away, and no city in the End would easily be able to form an army capable of challenging the Horde. The Void Realm had suffered the most crushing blow in its history. Ceres woke up in her prison cell, alerted by a noise. The first floor of the city's ancient library, which was inside of one of the obsidian pillars, had been stripped of its contents and turned into her cell, isolated far away from the enslaved Endermen. Immediately, she felt the heavy chains on her hands and feet binding her to the wall. More chains crossed her body, making movement practically impossible. The pain of every injury on her body hit her within a split second of waking up. A few major stab wounds marred her body, mainly on her neck. How she had survived these injuries was a miracle. Her torso stung horribly from the burns the pyromancer had inflicted. Various other cuts and wounds added to her suffering, and she was fairly certain that her right leg was broken. The ordeal she had experienced during these past few days as her captors interrogated and tortured her left more marks on her body. New cuts and welts dotted her arms and legs, and her face was bruised completely. Sores from having water poured on her spread throughout her entire body. Sarah sealed her eyes shut and breathed as steadily as she could, trying to bear through the pain. The mental pain hurt worse than any wound on her physical body. The grief was overwhelming, and Sarah felt tears for me. Vortis, Zeg, everyone, she thought. All dead. My home gone. My best friend in danger. She wanted to yell and scream at herself for her failure to protect her home. How could I let this happen? Suddenly, the noise that had awoken her sounded again, forcing Ceres out of her thoughts. Panic surged through her broken body, for she knew what the noise signified. The sound of footsteps came closer to the door, followed by the sound of the heavy door scraping across the ground as it opened. Neas the Nether King stepped in, followed by Generals Kralos and Hogsworth. "Ah, I see you're awake this time," Neas said with a smirk on his face. Normally, he had to wake her up for an interrogation. Sarah scanned the 3 faces that had just entered her prison. Anger burned on her face underneath the ugly bruises. "And I see you brought the whole group this time," she hissed. Speaking was hard due to the sheer exhaustion and pain she felt. "Why, Too afraid to deal with me alone? Naeus had only recruited his officer's help in torturing her once, and it had been the worst interrogation yet. This caused fear to fill Ceres. Her comment irked the Nether King. Naeus approached her and loomed over her. Ceres shook slightly, but she gritted her teeth, trying to erase the fear on her face. He punched her beneath the left eye, eliciting a horrid Enderman-like screech out of her. She spit blood and slowly turned her face to glare at him again. You constantly utter those spiteful little comments, yet you will not answer my simple questions. Why is that? His voice sounded sinister. He kicked her in the stomach, resulting in another scream and a round of her coughing. I'll never tell you! Sarah screamed in response to yet another blow. This one cracked her left shoulder. Naeus stomped on her right leg before she even finished shrieking. I just want to know a few things, Ceres. Where is the dragon tamer? I know you gave him the end crystals. You might as well tell me where he and the crystals are. There is no point in hiding this information from me. You have nothing left to live for. If this leg had not been broken before, it was broken now. Fortunately, her captor was clueless as to where the powerful artifacts actually were. She had actually scattered them across the overworld in order to protect them and the dragon tamer. I'll do. Ceres drew in several deep breaths. Anything for a friend. I'll take as much pain as I have to for him. This answer displeased Naeus. An hour of torture followed. Hogsworth and Krallis joined their leader as he violently questioned the queen. They dug new cuts into her skin. Bruises stained her until several parts of her body were darker shades of purple than her hair, and her right eye swelled shut from the injuries. All of Ceres' horrific, ear-splitting cries and screams were met with mocking and laughter from her punishers. Despite the suffering, the End Matriarch refused to sell out the last Ender Watcher. The phrase, anything for a friend, kept repeating through her mind, helping her tolerate her pain. You'll never know where they are! You're wrong! I do have a reason left to live! Every second you spend here with me is a second wasted that could be spent on your evil plans. But here you are, playing with a stubborn prisoner. Fool! Ceres yelled. Her voice was higher due to her pain. Fortunately, her wit had not been tortured away from her yet. However, her witty remarks could not stop the doubts in her mind about the prophecy. Doesn't the prophecy say that the sound of Krallis and Hogsworth laughing interrupted these doubtful thoughts? Naeus glanced at his officers with a smile on his face. Do you hear her? She thinks she has a reason to live. Krallis, finish the preparations. As Krallis exited the building, Naeus looked at Ceres' face to see her reaction to this comment. Shock, confusion, and fear painted the bruised purple face. Hogsworth, help me with this last part. Ceres took a moment to catch her breath as she pondered his statements. She began to whimper, and she felt close to fainting. Her head hung in exhaustion and shame. Through her disorientation, she did not even notice that Naeus and his assistant had moved to her right side until she felt them tear a section of her tattered clothes, exposing her shoulder. She lifted her head, but barely. She saw Hogsworth walk over to the fire on the far side of the building. He pulled out a long metal rod from the flames and returned to his master. What are you doing? She muttered in a shaky voice. Her heart pounded. Naeus laughed. Hold her still. I don't want her moving to mess this up. At his command, the general took hold of the prisoner. Ceres felt sick to her stomach when the pigman general grabbed her. As if I could move, she hissed, smelling Hogsworth's foul pig smell. She braced herself for what she knew was coming, but her efforts did not prevent the horrendous screech as the hot iron met her shoulder. The half-minute during which the iron was on her felt like 100 years, and the pain lingered even after it was removed. She opened her eyes, which she had forced shut. A skull had been branded into her shoulder. Now you bear my mark. 'Tis a shame you won't be alive much longer to admire it, Naeus said. He motioned for Hogsworth to unchain her. A minute later, Ceres was kneeling on a platform constructed in the center of the city, facing the 10 military officials who had managed to survive the battle. She mustered all her strength to hold her head up and look at the faces of her valiant warriors. She dropped her gaze after a second, knowing that it would shame her soldiers if the queen looked them in the eyes, as this was an insult in the end. A mountain of shame manifested itself as a knot in her stomach, especially as she heard Naeus's speech. "Behold, your former queen," Naeus declared, emphasizing the word former. The Enderman slaves hissed their disagreement with his statement, but he ignored this. "Look at her, bruised and beaten. She failed to protect your home. Now this world is fallen, and all that remains is your weak ally in the overworld. Because of her failure, all the worlds will soon be under my domain. Goodbye, Ceres the End Matriarch." Sarcasm and hatred simmered in his voice. He raised his weapon. Fresh tears began to fall as Ceres heard the weapon coming for her neck. In her mind, every word the Nether King had said was true. She had failed. Her home was burned to ashes. Her people were either dead or enslaved. Now, her closest friend in all the worlds were in danger. Perhaps the prophecy would never come to pass. Perhaps their destiny would never become reality. The blade hit the back of her neck, and Ceres' world turned black. The End Matriarch was dead. The setting is in the overworld. "No!" Rain the Dragon Tamer yelled suddenly. "No! No! No!" The super soldier, who had simply been walking across the campsite, just witnessed one of the most heartbreaking things he had ever seen. A vision of his best friend, Ceres, had entered his mind. These visions happened sometimes, but this one had been the worst. He had seen the vile skeleton who corrupted Abigail execute Ceres. His friends in the campsite turned to him in shock. "Rain!" Kane, the captain of the Netherbane, shouted. "Are you okay?" He ran over to Rain, joined by Stella the Enchantress and Ciara the Netherbane assassin. Kane put a hand on Rain's shoulder, checking to see if the soldier was injured all of a sudden. Rain shook his head, trying to make sense of the scene that had just played out in his mind. He gently removed Kane's hand from his shoulder and stepped away from the group. He could feel a wave of power rushing through his body. It was Ceres' power. "Gah!" he cried. "No! No!" He looked at Stella. Only she knew about his close connection with the End Queen, and Stella had also been very close with Ceres. "Stella, she's dead. Ceres is dead." Rain collapsed onto the ground. Stella's eyes grew wide. She grabbed Ciara to stop herself from falling. The assassin, although she usually did not like for the demon to touch her, gently helped Stella sit down. Are you sure?" Stella asked, her voice cracking. Ray nodded before pulling his knees to his chest and burying his head in them. "I saw it. I had a vision. Again." His words caused Stella to break into loud sobs, and soon he too began to cry. Hopelessness filled the dragon tamer. His best friend had given him so much hope, but now that hope was taken away from him. Rain's mind felt like it was reduced to ashes. He felt trapped and alone despite having 3 comrades around him. His closest friend was dead.